I think the sirens in the Odyssey sang the Odyssey, for there is nothing more seductive, more terrible than the story of our own life, the one we do not want to hear and will do anything to listen to. Hello, and welcome to Words That Burn, the podcast taking a closer look at poetry. The poem for this episode is Deconstruction by Mary Ruefle. It combines some of my favourite things in poetry. Firstly, it alludes to myth. Even better, the Odyssey, Homer's epic of war and tragedy. I will always have a soft spot when the classics are used in a poem. Secondly, there is an element of the metatextual in it. That is to say that it's a piece of art that references both itself and other works of art in it, often in impossible and, in this case, anachronistic ways. Most importantly, it rattled around my brain for ages after I read it. Reading Mary Ruefle's work will do that to you. Some small aspect of her clever, intricate layering will snag you. You'll find yourself looking at it in quiet moments, or hear it echo in your mind when you experience a feeling that you didn't think could be put on paper. Ruefle's skill is in storytelling. You could argue she has picked it up from decades of delivering lectures to rapt audiences. Lectures that twist and turn and surprise you with their seemingly meandering but often devastatingly sharp points. Perhaps her love of essays and well-constructed thought are what lend her the ability to tell a tale. Or it could simply have been honed throughout the course of writing and publishing 17 books of poetry since 1982. Such a commitment would turn anyone's tongue silver. Regardless of the source of her storytelling, she is masterful in her use of it. She might argue against that compliment though. She once described herself in much more humble terms as a sentence maker. This is an odd but effective way to describe her as a poet. The more familiar you become with her work, the more it makes sense. Indeed, it might be an apt description for any poet. Poetry is often a meticulous art form, where choosing the exact right word or phrase is the difference between writing, connecting with the reader, or languishing in an old document forever. As I said, apt for any poet, but perfect for the work of Mary Ruefle. The reason is simple. Mary Ruefle is an erasure poet. The accepted definition of an erasure poet is a poet who carves poems out of existing texts, using censorship and redaction. How the poet chooses to erase the words on the page is irrelevant. All that matters is what is left on the page when they are done. I've included an image of some of Ruefle's own work in the description so you can get a sense of what this abstract idea actually looks like. It is sometimes referred to as blackout poetry and often confused with found poetry, the art of discovering a phrase or snippet of language in another context, unrelated to poetry, then lifting it from that context and connecting it with something new. Ruefle herself is firmly against the association. She once stated in a talk that the books have been called found poems, but I don't consider them as such. A found poem is a text found in the world, taken out of its worldly context and labelled a poem. I certainly didn't find any of these pages, I made them. That definitive statement, I made them, is the distinction between found and erasure poetry. In Mary Ruefle's preferred form, there is a want to unearth something in the pages of old books and manuscripts. And while Ruefle states she has no agenda when she sits down to conduct erasure, there is an intent. The goal is to slowly pick away at the words on the page and find something. It is deconstruction by any other name. Which leads us to this remarkable poem. In 4 short lines, Mary Ruefle gives us an inkling of everything that drives her to write, and what singles her out as one of the most unique contemporary poets working today. While I would normally split lines up for the purpose of deconstruction myself, it would be a crime to break this single flow of thought up into pieces. So I'll simply read it again in its entirety. I think the sirens in the Odyssey sang the Odyssey, for there is nothing more seductive, more terrible, than the story of our own life, the one we do not want to hear and will do anything to listen to. Earlier, I mentioned that this poem is metatextual. It is a trope that appears almost habitually in Ruefle's work. She is in many ways a zealot for the act of reading, and a true believer in the essential need to engage in that act to make poetry. In 2012, she delivered a lecture called "Someone Reading a Book is a Sign of Order in the World." In it, she waxed lyrical about how the act of reading and all it entails bends time and space. That great love of reading, then, means that it's no surprise that the Odyssey, a text that has itself inspired countless others, is the cornerstone of this brief vignette. In her skill with language and storytelling, Ruefle brings us back there, all those centuries ago, bending time and space, if only for the briefest tick of the clock. She references perhaps one of the most well-known encounters within the Odyssey, the Sirens. The Sirens are counted among the many temptress characters that appear in Homer's epic poem. Their goal is to draw sailors to their doom with their song. When it comes to the Odyssey, they lure sailors astray, drawing them to the dangerous rocks where they make their home. When it is Odysseus' turn to sail the gauntlet, as it were, the eponymous hero of the epic poem is serenaded by a song made up of his own glorious exploits during the Trojan War. Emily Wilson, the latest recognized translator of the epic, puts it best in her introduction to the text when she writes, "The temptation offered by the Sirens is to listen forever and know everything that the Greeks and Trojans suffered in the war." One might think that Odysseus would want this, above all, as an ego boost. The Sirens address him as the glory of the Greeks, and their songs promise an endless retelling of Odysseus' own finest hours. So Ruefle's micro-retelling here is near perfect in capturing the tone and aim of the original. The next two lines are a very illustrative example of another of the great themes of Ruefle's work, the unbearable weight of being. The poem states, "For there is nothing more seductive, more terrible, than the story of our own life." The art of erasure poetry is more than just a form or technique for Mary Ruefle. In many ways, she believes that erasure, deconstruction, and reduction are essential tools for human survival. She gave a hint at her reasoning in a lecture she delivered in 2015.
Life is much, much more than is necessary, and much, much more than any of us can bear, so we erase it, or it erases us.
If life itself is too much input, too much feeling, too much story, then erasure is not a poetic indulgence, but a coping mechanism. It is a means by which to process and sit with the vast amounts of information we collect over a lifetime. It's so essential, in fact, that Ruefle believes we have a built-in tool for it: memory. Her works actively engage with this idea of memory and erasure, examining how meaning is reconfigured over time and through experience, how words constantly, as critic Akiko Bush wrote, reposition themselves in memory. Ruefle's poetry shows us how memory both gilds and tarnishes our lives in equal measure. We are prone to painting ourselves the hero in many of our recollections. We are just as likely to amplify the hardships wrought upon us and the injustices done to us in the same way. This is precisely what Ruefle is alluding to with the words, nothing more seductive, more terrible. The poem underlines the contradictory nature of seduction in its final line. The one we do not want to hear and will do anything to listen to. There is something very vulnerable in the line. It is an acknowledgement that to be human is to be humble and egotistical all at once. Ruefle intertwines that vulnerability with being human, pulling us into introspection with the sudden shift from the I in the first two lines to we in the last few syllables. It is not a judgment from the poet, but rather an invitation to admit that we are intrigued by our own stories and obsessed with how they are told. Another layer is added to the title then. In one single beat, the deconstruction promised by the title broadens to encompass more than just the story of Odysseus or some abstracted speaker of the poem. It shines a spotlight on ourselves as well. The title of this poem does so much lifting. Deconstruction is the lens that allows us to explore the 4 short lines that we might otherwise skim through. The looping refrain of "In the Odyssey sang the Odyssey" might be dismissed as bordering on silliness if we didn't have the title. It invites us to look at why Ruefle would reference that famous narrative in this way. It allows us to think about why a life story might be seductive and terrible, beyond the need for a poetic turn of phrase. Finally, it unlocks a contemplative mode for us to compare our own existence to that of an ancient hero. To think of a life, whether real or not, that was retold centuries ago, and through that invitation to deconstruct, find a potentially painful relevance to our own lives still. This is the skill of Mary Ruefle. It would be easy to dismiss her works of Erasure as gimmick. Some might even go as far as to say that Erasure poetry is not real poetry. This would be a mistake. Ruefle has dedicated herself to this process for decades, and it has granted her an ability to make use of an economy of language and a gift for restructuring the words on a page to imbue a deeper sense of meaning to short syllables and lines. When I first read the poem, I admired the cleverness, the metatextuality. I enjoyed the references to myth and modernity. I love clever wordplay, but something kept pulling me back to it though. Upon each new reread, I would find more and more to connect with. In a sense, I found myself under the siren song of Mary Ruefle and her poetry. And now, you might find yourself hearing it too. What did you think of the poem? This is, as always, just my interpretation, my own close reading, but I would love to hear yours. There are lots of ways to get in touch with the podcast. You can send me an email at wordsthatburnpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow the podcast on Instagram or on TikTok, both of which you can find below in the description. If you're listening on Spotify, you can find me on YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, you can find me on Spotify. The script for this episode, complete with citations and references throughout, can be found at the Substack link in the description too. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving me a review wherever you listen, or following the podcast. Better yet, if you know someone who might enjoy this podcast, please consider sending it to them directly. The music in this week's episode was created by Scott Buckley. The episode was written and produced by me, Benjamin Collopy. Thank you so much for listening. You'll hear from me again soon.